please have your seats. We'll get started in just a few moments. Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see all your beautiful faces on this kind of dreary morning. Thank you for coming out. And welcome to the Reverend Dr. Robert Lawrence Civic Engagement Summit. My name is Francis Ndicu, and I'm a junior pre-med and business management major and president of our Student Government Association. It's my pleasure to be your MC for today's event. So we are thrilled that you could all join us today and for the discussion about the power of civic engagement, building social capital, expanding economic opportunities, and strengthening our communities. In my time here, I've had the pleasure of working as an Endeavor Scholar and participating in countless service projects. And this campus has been my home for a little over 3 years now. And in that time, I've grown as a student leader, as a student, a global citizen, and as a person. And this institution has provided me with the tools and resources that I've needed to grow and succeed. And for that, I'm really grateful. And now, at this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our Chancellor, Dr. Divina Grossman, for welcome remarks. Chancellor Grossman became Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts-Dartmouth on July 1st, 2012. Prior to joining UMass-Dartmouth, Dr. Grossman was the founding Vice President for Engagement at Florida International University, where she had also served as Dean of the College of Nursing and Health Sciences and Dean of the Nursing School. She's committed to creating opportunities that support community engagement and recently said that civic engagement is part of our university's DNA. The impact of this activity transforms the community in positive ways as it enhances the learning experience of our students, like myself. So, without further ado, please welcome Chancellor Grossman.
Thank you, Francis. And we have Francis, the president of our Student Government Association, but we also have a number of other student leaders here. So, not only from UMass-Dartmouth, but also from our local high schools. So, would you please stand up, UMass-Dartmouth students, and also the high school students from Fairhaven High School, and Old Rochester?
Atlantis Charter.
Oh, okay, Atlantis Charter, you're here? So would everybody please stand up, all of us students? Wonderful. And they are the reason that all of us are here. So I tried this morning by force of will to bring spring, but the weather didn't cooperate. But hopefully it'll get better as the day goes on. I want to welcome all of you to the Reverend Robert Lawrence Hall. This is where you are, is Lawrence Hall. And welcome to the Lawrence Civic Engagement Summit. And sitting here in front of all of us is a man who personifies community service, has been a leader in service in our community for more than 5 decades. Reverend Robert Lawrence. And of course, we can't recognize Reverend Lawrence without recognizing Beth Duffy, who is also very active at the university, especially in mentoring students at our law school. And Beth has also been very active in the community, advocating on behalf of individuals with disabilities. She's a lawyer, so Beth Duffy. And you know, none of this would happen without that very beginning gift from Bob and Jeannie Leduc, who had the vision for civic engagement, for community engagement at UMass-Dartmouth. And it is that philanthropic gift that led to the establishment of the Leduc Center for Civic Engagement, and Jeannie Leduc is here with us. I think I want to say that they walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So they are there with us. So when we were at the Boys and Girls Club in Fall River serving meals, both Ginny and Bob were there, serving the salad and serving the pasta and visiting with the young people that were there. And of course, the leader of the Leduc Center for Civic Engagement is our Assistant Provost and our Director, Dr. Matt Roy. There is a whole team that makes this happen. Deirdre Healy and a cast of thousands, and I would be remiss if I did not recognize them. But I want to thank all of you for your leadership every single day, both at the university and in all the community organizations where our students are. There are many people in the room that I want to recognize, but I do not want to use up all of the time. But there are a few I would like to mention because they have, for the last many years, been the leaders of service in our community, not just at the university, but serving, again, almost all the organizations in the South Coast. And you know them because you see them in almost every event where there is a need to raise funds or provide leadership. And I am talking about people like Nick Christ, the president of Bay Coast Bank. And Michelle Roberts, vice president of Bristol County Savings. But I think you know that we have profound gratitude for the work that you're doing and the community that you serve. All of them are very grateful, and it makes all of us a much stronger community. I want to recognize the presence here of our provost, our cabinet members, and our deans. They're the ones that are on my team helping to move the agenda of the university every day. So Provost Kareem, cabinet members and deans, if you would stand up. Thank you. This is a very special day because the Lawrence Civic Engagement Summit is an annual event, and we usually invite a distinguished national leader to speak. In past years, for example, we've had Ira Harkavy from the Netter Center for Community Engagement at the University of Pennsylvania. This has become a signature event at UMass-Dartmouth. And if you look around the room, you will see some quotes that have to do with service. So this very room, I think, speaks and reflects the ethos of service at UMass-Dartmouth. At the core of our university and our mission is a rich learning experience for every student that is anchored in civic engagement. And this mission has been embedded here for many decades, and that is what has attracted me to the university. If we believe that the animating purpose of higher education is to build a democracy and to build a civil society, what we do here is exactly what we need to be doing, and that is to prepare citizens who have a sense of their civic responsibility, who have a civic attachment to our community, and who will be the future leaders of our democracy. No one exemplifies that better than Jacob Miller. Jacob Miller, who's our student trustee, was just named 2 days ago a Truman Scholar. Scholarship is probably one of the most prestigious, if not the most prestigious, public service scholarship in the United States. He's the only one that won it in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. There were 688 applicants, 200 finalists who went through a very rigorous interview process, and there were only 54 that were selected in the United States. And Jacob Miller is the only one who won it in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The experiences our students acquire as they engage in communities across the South Coast, across the country, and indeed around the world. For example, our nursing students, led by Dean Kimberly Christopher and Professor Mary Ellen Brisboe, had just come back from spring break in the Azores. And we have a group of students who also came back, nursing students, who came back from providing healthcare services in Haiti. So it's not just in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but around the world. And these provide some of the most transformative learning experiences. They teach our students about the communities where they will be working and where they will live and lead. They teach our students about valuable skills and knowledge. But most importantly, these experiences teach them about themselves, what motivates them, what inspires them, and what capacity they have to change the world. When we toured with Bob and Jeannie Ledoux and Matt and a group of our students, I think this was about 1.5 years ago, and we went from one organization to another, from the YMCA, where our students help in harvesting produce that's distributed to homeless soup kitchens, to the Centro Comunitario de Trabajadores, which is a center for Mayan immigrants, where our law school immigration students, immigration clinic students, and also our anthropology professor, Lisa Maya, now were served, to the Economic Development Corporation in downtown New Bedford. You will see our students everywhere. In the Community Economic Development Corporation, our accounting students help prepare tax returns for low-income families. This is the fabric and texture of UMass Dartmouth. When we toured that area and we asked the students, what is the most valuable learning experience they gained? More often than not, their answer is learning to walk in another person's shoes. Learning to understand what it's like to be in the situation of that person and developing a sense of empathy. And I would like, since this is National Poetry Month, and Matt taught me a lesson yesterday when we were at the Marine Museum, he started off with a poem. So I'd like to end my remarks with a poem about kindness and empathy. I hope the internet works. But this poem by Naomi Shihab Nye is about kindness. And it says, before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for, and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. I think that's the sentiment of community engagement. Thank you. So I would be remiss if I did not recognize our guests. I'm going to turn this over to Francis, but I just want to say that we are very, very honored to have two national leaders, Russell Krumnow, Managing Director for Opportunity Nation. By the way, Jacob Miller worked with Opportunity Nation. And of course, Wendy Spencer, who's the CEO of the Corporation for National and Community Service. They are the national agency, the federal agency, that manage the President's Higher Education Community Service Honor Roll. And we have been a top finalist in that honor roll for the last 3 years. And we also have, I want to mention that Colleen Dawicki is here. She used to head our urban initiative, and she's now the Senior Community Development Analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston. Thank you, Colleen, for being here. And I want to welcome my colleague, John Saltmarsh, who directs NERCHI, the New England Research for Higher Education Center at UMass Boston. And they are the ones that manage the Carnegie Community Engagement Classification for universities and colleges. And we, again, have just received the recertification of the Carnegie Community Engagement. So we are again classified, as we were before, as one of those institutions in the United States. So thank you for coming this morning, John. So thank you so much to all of you for being here, and I'm going to turn over the podium to Francis Ndicu. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Grossman, for your opening remarks. First, our first keynote speaker is Russell Krumnow, the Managing Director of Opportunity Nation. He guides the strategy for Opportunity Nation's diverse mix of initiatives, including coalition engagements, events, policy advocacy, and grassroots initiatives. We are honored to have him here today to talk about the Opportunity Index, the nation's first and only tool to holistically measure opportunity. Connecting multiple economic, educational, and civic factors, the index is a powerful way for communities to track the advancement of opportunity. Please give a warm UMass-Dartmouth welcome to Russell Krumnow. Thank you to the Chancellor, to the whole UMass-Dartmouth team. Really, really honored to be a part of this. I think if every institution of higher education in the country had the same deep commitment you all do to civic education and to really being deeply involved in your community, we'd be a better country for it. So I'm really honored to be here and want to just off the top acknowledge and celebrate the commitment you all have made to really be invested in your community and to turn out not only educated young adults, but citizens, right, which is the highest calling we have as Americans. So thank you for that commitment, and I hope that you'll continue to be an example for other institutions around the country. It's great to be in Massachusetts. I'm up from DC. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Great. Fantastic. Okay. And it's an exciting time to be here for a few reasons, right? So it stopped snowing. I understand it finally stopped snowing. Even though it's middle of April, I was still wondering if it would snow today. And I know it's a special, certainly up in Boston, a special weekend with the marathon. And did the Boston Celtics squeeze into the playoffs somehow? I don't know how that happened. So I don't know if you're basketball fans, but congratulations if you follow the Celtics. Well, great to be with you. I'm with Opportunity Nation, which is a national bipartisan campaign that works on closing the opportunity divide in our country and making sure the place that you're born does not determine how high you can climb. That's a fundamental ethic we all share and a belief as Americans, but we know that for many people, in fact, their zip code often has too much to say about the opportunities that they have. So we do that through a variety of means that you can see on the screens. The part of our work I'm going to focus on today is this tool called the Opportunity Index, which is a way to measure what's going on in the communities and to give us a jumping off point for really catalyzing some great work so that we have informed efforts driven by data. We also do policy advocacy, even in the sort of tough political climate in Congress. We're excited to work with members of both parties on these issues. We think that they don't have to be terribly ideological, that we all want to have equality of opportunity in this country. And we also work with diverse groups around the country, really believing the only way to tackle these issues is across sectors and across the ideological spectrum. So we work really hard to bring people together from higher ed, business, nonprofit, etc. I think the best way to start off explaining the Opportunity Index, though, is to tell you a little bit about the experience of two kids. So we've got John and Jane, is what we're going to call them. And they live in similarly sized counties. One of them lives in Georgia, and one of them lives in Maryland. And we know that the counties have about the same number of people and about the same unemployment rate, right? So if that's all that you knew about John and Jane's experience, you might make a reasonable assumption that they probably have a similar chance to succeed in life based on those numbers. But in fact, when you dig a little bit deeper and look at some of the other data points that our Opportunity Index captures, we see that, in fact, their circumstances are very different. One of them lives in a county where the median wages are about $15,000 a year higher. One of them lives in a county where adults are much more likely to have an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree or higher beyond high school, which we know means they're equipped to succeed in the workforce, right? And one of them lives in a county where there are many fewer young adults disconnected from school and work. So it's much more common for 16 to 24-year-olds to be either getting training, getting a first job, or both. So in fact, when we dig below the surface, we learn that the the one who lives in the place where those indicators are heading in the right direction, may have a slightly easier path toward economic opportunity and security. Which gets us to kind of our thesis statement as a campaign about really wanting to make sure that the zip code is not destiny. So what we've tried to do is bring together a coalition. You're going to see some of the logos cycling through here. But the idea of Opportunity Nation is we can tackle this stuff together. We just convened a major national summit on youth employment in Washington, D.C. a little over a month ago. And we brought together the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, the United Way, a bunch of innovative nonprofits, some higher ed groups, and a whole bunch of young adults, one of which was Jacob Miller, is part of a cohort of opportunity leaders around the country that we've been working with that are doing innovative things in their community and doing amazing things like winning Truman Fellowships, and really brought them together around some solutions. We have historically high youth unemployment. How do we work together to drive that down? It's really going to take all of us. And so these are some of the people who were involved in that summit and who are involved broadly in our work as a campaign. But what I really want to focus on today is this tool, the Opportunity Index, which we've worked with our research partners at Measure of America to create. The idea is, as you saw with John and Jane, if you have only one indicator or one data point about someone's experience, it may not tell you the whole picture. But in fact, if you have a suite of indicators that give you a more comprehensive snapshot of what's going on, we can kind of better understand not only someone's lived experience, but what we can all do together to sort of increase those pathways. So here's what the Opportunity Index site looks at. So this is just a snapshot of the homepage, which is both accessible on mobile and certainly on your laptop. You can see the US here. This is the county level view of the tool. We're going to walk through what are the indicators that we include. But the basic thing to understand here is that the darker colors always represent higher scores on the map, and the lighter colors of blue represent lower scores. So just at a glance right here, you can see that the northeastern US and the upper Midwest tend to do a little better, and that parts of the deep south and the southwest tend to have lower scores. And we're going to dig in a second to the very local data for you all. So these are the indicators that we include in the Opportunity Index. And I'm going to touch on a few of these. And if this is tough to read for anybody, this is all on the website at opportunityindex.org. All of the sources are listed, and we explain all the indicators we've included. So again, getting back to our idea of a comprehensive snapshot, what are the conditions in a community that could open doors of opportunity, right? That's our goal here. So we're not measuring sort of personal traits and demographic data. That obviously matters. But we're measuring things we can change. We're measuring community conditions we can work together and pull the lever on and actually move the needle. And they break into these three buckets because we're trying to have, again, a sort of full sense of what's going on. So first of all, the economic bucket of indicators includes things like the unemployment rate, which is very important, but doesn't tell us everything, right? What do those jobs pay? What's the poverty rate in the community? What's the rate of inequality, which is a measure that takes the 80th percentile of income for your community and compares it to the 20th. It gives us a little bit of a sense of how equally distributed earnings are in that place. We think that's important because we've heard a lot of conversation around 99 versus 1%, and that's a worthwhile debate to be having. We want to back up off those edges just a little to the 80th and 20th percentiles, where more people actually fall on the spectrum, and you can still see significant differences in income at that level. So that's an important indicator on the economic front. We take a look at access to assets, which is a proxy for banking institutions. We know that even in a world where more and more people do their banking online, that having a bricks and mortar bank in your community, and we just heard some folks that are connected to financial institutions here this morning, we know that's very important. We know especially for low-income people, being banked to save money and have access to financial products is very important. We also, obviously, we want fewer and fewer people using check cashing establishments or falling prey to predatory lending. So we have a measure that's there. We have a measure of affordable housing, which is pretty straightforward, the percentage of adults that are in what the government considers affordable housing, which of course speaks to how much money you have left for other things, and the rate of high-speed internet access. Then there's a set of educational indicators, which includes preschool enrollment. This is how many 3- and 4-year-olds are enrolled in a program. I don't have to tell a bunch of educators that starting early is very, very important, and we set our kids up to succeed as they enter kindergarten ready to learn. We have a measure of on-time high school graduation, which we know is now just sort of a foundation in this economy. It's no longer enough for many people, but in fact, getting to that threshold is very important. Massachusetts is a state, a commonwealth, I should say, that typically does very well in high school grad rates, and you all have made big investments and done a lot of interventions to make that happen. And then the third ed measure is around higher ed achievement. So this is the percentage of adults in a particular place that have an associate's degree or higher. And the reason we chose that measure is because we really want to capture the full breadth of higher ed experiences. We think four-year degrees are fantastic. We also think there's a lot of other pathways that make sense for young adults sometimes. That might be technical training, that might be a career certificate. And so what we want to say is, let's build lots of pathways to success. Let's not stigmatize any of them, and let's set all of our young adults up to succeed in the economy, because we're better off with all of our talent on the field. This third bucket might seem like the least intuitive. If you're like, all right, I want to build a tool that measures conditions in a community that sort of speak to opportunity. The economy, I get it, jobs, money, I get education, that's critical. What's this community piece about? This one really speaks to all of the other things that go into someone having access to social capital, someone living in a safe place, someone having access to healthcare. So there's a measure of per capita access to doctors, to healthy food. There's a safety measure that looks at the violent crime rate. And then there's two civic engagement measures we're going to talk more about today, because obviously, given the topic of this forum, I know it's close to many of your hearts, and that's group membership and volunteerism rates, which both speak to the accrual of social capital, right? We know that people build networks when they engage in the community. And so this is an important piece around how our doors of opportunity open for us through who we know, which we all recognize as how the world often works. And right in the middle there's a measure of youth disconnection, which we're also going to say more about. This is, again, the rate of 16 to 24-year-olds who are both out of school and work, not just one or the other, but are totally disconnected. And as you can imagine, that one comes into play pretty importantly. So this is all existing government data we've pulled together in one place, and hopefully an easy-to-use, interactive, clickable map. But this is relied upon trusted stats from the American Community Survey, the Census Bureau, the Department of Justice, etc. And what we've done here is pulled it together so every single state and DC gets a score, and they are ranked 1 to 51, and over 2,600 counties get a grade, like in school, A to F, which covers over 99% of the public. So there's a very, very small number of Americans that live in a really, really rural county where there's just simply not enough data on all of these indicators to give them a score. So here's what the site looks like when you zoom in. You can type in the search bar a specific place that you want to look up. The scores are broken down by county because that's where the largest amount of data is collected. That's the unit of measure the government has decided to most richly collect data from, as many of you know. One thing, a little commercial for something we would like to do is also build a metro level filter on top of the county filter for future years. We're not there yet, but we know depending on where you live, we know certain parts of the country think about place around counties, and that matters, and you know the county that you live in, and you think about it as something meaningful. And we know in other areas, counties aren't really that important, and in fact, people associate themselves with the nearest city or metro area. So we want to make the data accessible by both. So we're still working on that. So what we have here is Bristol County, Mass, which I think is where we're sitting, right, at the moment. So again, you can see a bigger, more easy to read version of this when you explore the site. But what you'll see is the scores for your county you've pulled up compared to the state averages, compared to the national averages alongside each other. So you can very quickly see how your county is comparing to Massachusetts writ large and to the whole nation. What a lot of the data points show you is that against the national averages, this county tends to fall in pretty average ranges, which is why you see a score of a C+ in the upper left-hand box. And compared to Massachusetts as a state, as a commonwealth, you see that Bristol County typically is a little lower than some of the state scores, which are higher in some other counties. Does that surprise people? Does it sound about right, based on your experience? An interesting note here, so the Opportunity Index we first launched in 2011, which is when Opportunity Nation started as a campaign. So we now have a few years of data to show some trends. and we update it every fall. So first of all, coming to a laptop near you this fall is new data. So stay tuned, probably in September or October, we can see how Bristol County is doing. But looking back on the last few years, the county has actually moved up a little. I believe your grade was just a C or maybe even a C minus the first year, and it has bumped up a little. So on the bell curve continuum of county grades, that is certainly positive news. So you can dig into these scores a little bit more on your own. It looks like the PowerPoint deck in translation here, as it's been inserted, has thrown off our columns a little. So apologies that this is confusing to read. It looks like the Massachusetts numbers were sort of pushed over. But basically, if you can track that, you can see that the Bristol County scores, again, there's a higher unemployment rate than your state average, and not quite as high of an educational attainment rate for higher education. Also, the percentage of young adults not in school and not working, again, those numbers should be slid over. So I believe it's the 11.7 is your local score, the 9% number is your state score. So you can see Massachusetts does very well compared to a 14% national average. So nationally, about 1 in 7 young adults are disconnected from school and work. It's a really high number. That's a lot of young talent that's not getting on the job ladder, that's not building any networks, and their lifetime earnings are depressed as a result. And frankly, as taxpayers, that's also an increased social service cost to everyone. So whether you're driven by concern for the young people in your own life or frankly a real bottom line concern, and I know many of us are driven by both, that's a really concerning. So again, this is the data from last fall that we'll be updating again in a few months this fall. But here's the state level map. Again, the darker blue scores are the better scores. And you can see that several of the states in the Northeast, including Massachusetts, tend to do well and typically are in the top 10. The top 5 states, which includes where we sit, are listed here for last year, and then you can see the states that are at the bottom. An interesting note here, and again, none of this data is meant to beat anybody up or make anybody feel badly about where they live. Hopefully it's empowering to see the numbers and to help jumpstart a conversation. And again, I'm guessing a lot of this for most folks who are plugged in, affirms what they know about place. But Nevada, which has scored, which candidly has scored last every time we've done these calculations, does okay on a couple of economic indicators. Their median wages aren't terrible because, as you can imagine, there are some good paying jobs associated with the tourism industry, right? So on balance, they do have a decent median wage as a state, but their educational outcomes are very poor. They do a really bad job of getting young kids into preschool. Their high school grad rates are, I think, the worst in the country. Maybe only about half of students finish high school on time, which is obviously a big problem. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that around the population being transient, the housing bust hit them really hard. But my point is, they are a good example of a composite index really adding value, because if you just looked at one piece of that, you might get a skewed picture. But in the aggregate, when you look at a bunch of things, you see that Nevada has some struggles. So some key top line findings you all might find interesting from the most recent year of data. First of all, each year we've done the Opportunity Index. The overall score, for the country in the aggregate, has bumped up, which would make sense, right? We are recovering from the Great Recession. More people are going back to work. So that would sort of stand to reason. And a lot of those gains have come in those first 2 buckets. They've come in the economic arena, where again, unemployment rates are obviously way down from where they were. So that has increased scores. We've also seen some educational gains. High school graduation rates, this is a good story to tell. I think people often assume the news is sort of always bad, and there's plenty of concerning news here we're going to touch on, but I think this is largely a good story. Now, there are lots of high schools and K-12 systems, and you all know this better than me, in low-income areas that are disproportionately made up of students of color that still tend to have lower grad rates. So we've got a lot of work to do to close that gap. So there's no question, there's a lot of work in front of us. But the top line grad rates, as we've been seeing, bump up to 79, 80, 81% over the last couple of years. That's good news. I know there's sort of a national goal of hitting 90% by 2020 that many of our partners have embraced, and certainly that the administration has embraced. And so we want to all keep pushing for that. So we've been seeing some real gains there. But look at these numbers that tell sort of a fuller story on why the numbers aren't rising more quickly and why place continues to matter quite a bit. So there are areas recovering better than others. You can see here the median income from the first year we did the index. So that far right column has the 2011 data, and then the closer column that has the 2014 data. you can see it's actually been stagnant, they've been falling back a little bit nationally. So again, this has been covered pretty widely in the media. The average family is not making any more money than they were before the recession. And in fact, a lot of families in the middle of the spectrum are at about where they were income-wise, in some cases like 15 years ago. That really tracks with the next two numbers, which shows the poverty rate has actually bumped up a little. So people are going back to work. In some cases, maybe they're taking low-wage jobs. There's a whole bunch of things going on there that are very complicated. But we've actually seen poverty rates continue to be quite high. And finally, this measure of income inequality. Again, this is the rate of comparison between that 80th and 20th percentile, right? So the bigger the number, the more inequality. 4.9 means that is sort of the average ratio, 4.9 more times the income for the person at the 80th level to the 20th. So that number has bumped up. So the gains of the recovery are not accruing evenly, basically is what this tells us, right? The gains are accruing to the top, meaning wealthier people are seeing more of the benefit from the economic recovery, even though the country as a whole, we're seeing some scores bump along and rise. So this is the mixed bag, right? We've got some good news to report. We've also got some sort of concerning trends here. And this is a slightly wonky point, sort of, that's going to wrap up kind of the big key findings here. But stick with me. Everybody's with me, right? You guys are super engaged. You love numbers first thing in the morning. This is like the best day of your life. Okay, great. So we measure a whole bunch of stuff, right? 16 indicators. They're all very important. But when you run a correlation to figure out which is having the biggest impact, it's these two. It's the poverty rate and the rate of youth disconnection, right? So they all really matter. They all can help move the dials, but these two have a big impact. Now, poverty probably does not surprise you. That's sort of a stand-in for a whole thicket of challenges if someone's living in poverty that they are facing. The youth disconnection rate, frankly, that surprised us. We did not set out with that end in mind, and that is one of the reasons Opportunity Nation has now, as a campaign, decided to really focus on getting more of our young adults onto successful education and career pathways, because this finding showed us if we pull that lever, we can really have positive ripple effects for the whole community. Here's the top line number, again, on disconnection. Now, I don't want to get totally hung up on this number because there are millions more young people that are very tenuously connected to the job market. Maybe they have a part-time job and aren't plugged into any training opportunity. So there's lots more young people than just this we should have our eyes on. But those who are actually fully sort of disconnected is at 5.6 million, slightly down from the year before, which again is good news and I think speaks to all the interventions folks are doing and the ongoing recovery, but that's still a lot of young people that aren't plugged in. So what I want to say a little bit about now is digging in on the civic engagement piece, which I know is close to the hearts of everybody here. As you saw within the index, there are a couple of indicators that really dig into that issue. And so what we did last year for the first time is really a deep dive on that and trying to draw connections between those data points and this broader picture of expanding opportunity. We know in our hearts, we know in our lived experience, we know from all the programs we've run that when people are plugged into service opportunities, it has other positive benefits. But I think with great people like Wendy Spencer, we're all continuing to look for the data that proves that. We have some. We wanted to help add to that body of data. And so we really did a deep dive here, again with our research partners at Measure of America and our great supporters at the City Foundation, to look at those two specific indicators in a more in-depth way. What could we say about places that have higher scores on those fronts regarding this broader question of opportunity? Could we say anything meaningful there? And could we say anything meaningful about young people in particular? The answer was yes. We found some really interesting things. And this report, along with all of the resources around the Opportunity Index, is on our site. It's free and available to everyone. There's no sign-in or membership or anything to access that. So please dig in. This is on the Opportunity Nation site, and you can see not only the full report if you really want to read it all, but there's also some great infographics that are really easy to share on social media and easy to use maybe in your own presentations. So please feel free to do that. So the first sort of big finding was the chance of a young adult being disconnected from work and school dropped by about half if they volunteered. And we ran that correlation both ways. I'm not a statistician, but we worked with folks who are. So you might be thinking this is sort of a self-selection bias. We actually flipped it around both ways to make sure we weren't just picking out young adults that were sort of already predisposed to not be disconnected, and found that the correlation did hold up. It was especially meaningful for young adults of color. Their disconnection rates also fell considerably if they had been engaged in some sort of volunteer activity in the last year. This makes a lot of sense, right? I think this is something we sort of already kind of intuitively know. This is a great data point to underline that, because if you're connected through service, you have networks, and you have people that are looking out for you, and that are helping you find career and educational opportunities. Civic engagement broadly, and specifically these types of civic engagement, we looked at a bunch, we tested a bunch of things. We specifically found that, again, volunteering and participating specifically in a civic or service group, which is how folks can respond, on the questions that are asked, oftentimes on the surveys that that folks like CNCS do, was a significant predictor. So when you look at the state level, basically these things would move in tandem. Higher civic engagement scores would track with higher scores on the Opportunity Index broadly, meaning, again, you have an ethic of service and connectedness that is having payoffs in the real bread and butter issues around economics, which I think is really powerful. We also found, and this is especially interesting in the sort of current economic moment that we're in, an inverse relationship between volunteerism and inequality, which is a good thing, right? So higher rates of volunteerism correlated with places that had more equal distributions of income. We're not pointing causal arrows. I'm not saying one absolutely leads to the others. There's a whole bunch of things going on in an economy that lead to how income is distributed. But again, we found a correlation here that we think is powerful, and it's another data point for folks in the civic engagement space. Frankly, it's also a data point for people not in the civic engagement space, which I think is especially exciting. I don't know if you all ever feel like, I'm preaching to the choir, I need more allies. It's great that you have some supporters in the room, some employers in the community who really care about this, because we really need their hands in this work. And I think data points like this can be important to engage folks who maybe aren't living and breathing this work, right? We also found that same kind of inverse relationship with youth disconnection. So again, places that had these higher kind of civic engagement and volunteerism rates tended to have lower percentages of young adults who were disconnected, which has, of course, huge payoffs for having, again, tax-paying citizens who are plugged in and connected versus young adults who are on the sidelines and really struggling in their community. So those are some of the big findings from that report that I would encourage you all to check out. I'm guessing Wendy is going to have a lot more to say with a lot more data that they have collected as well. I think this is a nice companion to all the good work that CNCS does. So let's back up to John and Jane, who we started with, right? They're growing up in these two counties that had similar unemployment rates and about the same number of people. In fact, we see John is growing up in a county with almost 1,000 more young adults who are disconnected, which correlates to a much lower score on the Opportunity Index. So this is sort of the spoiler of the hook that we started with. We see Jane growing up in a place where more young adults are finishing high school on time, more young people are getting higher ed credentials, and that even though that first snapshot on unemployment would give you the sense that they're in a similar place, in fact, it's much more common for young adults in John's experience to be disconnected. The exciting thing is the work that you all are doing and their findings of that report and of the index broadly show us civic engagement can be a route into attacking this problem, along with all of the other smart interventions that I know the folks at UMass-Dartmouth are interested in. There we go, I alluded to different scores. So if you looked at those counties in the index, you would see a C grade for Cecil County, Maryland, and a B grade for Fayette County, Georgia. Can John still make it? Does personal ambition and endeavor matter? 100%, of course it does. But we have to acknowledge that for way too many people, and especially for way too many young people who frankly don't get to choose their parents and don't get to choose the place they happen to be born, the zip code has a lot to say about how high they can climb. It's on all of us to step up and make sure that's not the case for everybody, so that whether you're growing up in a county that has a grade of a C or a B or an A or an F, that we can drive those scores up and have better outcomes for John and Jane and all of our kids. So that is the presentation on the Opportunity Index. I hope that was helpful to sort of put some frame around the conversation. All of the tools, again, are available, not only the site itself, but there's a whole bunch of supporting materials I would encourage you to check out. There are fact sheets that look at each indicator, right? So they look at the higher ed one in detail, they look at the preschool enrollment in detail, and really help make the case in a very straightforward way. Why does this matter? So some of those resources could be helpful when you're meeting with your board, when you're meeting with a funder, when you're meeting with a possible political ally, or someone you hope to become a political ally, right? These may be some ways for you to sell your work and to effectively frame it. Because when we get out of our silos and we stop just thinking about the program I'm running and think about this broader idea of we want to all have a rising tide and expanding opportunity for everyone, that's really going to get more people in the door and at the table. which I think we can all agree is better for everyone. We want more allies and more champions around this work. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you. I know we have a couple of discussants. Really look forward to hearing from Colleen and Jacob, who we're so proud is a part of our network. Congrats again. So I'm going to wrap up there and invite them up. Thanks.
Our first discussant will be Colleen Dawicki, who is a Senior Community Development Analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston. Prior to her appointment at the Federal Reserve, she worked here as the Director of Urban and Community Planning for the Public Policy Center here at UMass.
Russell, for not only setting the context, but also for doing something that I used to do when I worked at UMass-Dartmouth, which is sort of establishing something of a challenging picture for our region. So I think when we were looking at the Opportunity Index and thinking about our community, first of all, I would dare say the C+ was not surprising to us. And I think we also thought about the fact that the C+ is for Bristol County, but we have probably every community in the region is on that bell curve, on the spectrum. So we have kids growing up in cities where a C+ might be something to aspire to, and we have kids growing up in communities who are probably in the A range. Not only that, but we're also living in a state that is number 3 for opportunity, and we're not quite there yet. So there's this gap, and Russell really illustrated that quite nicely. And so instead of me telling you more about the problem, I'm going to talk about something that I'm working on that's hopefully getting us in the direction of a solution. So when you hear about civic engagement, and I think we've all bought into that message, civic engagement matters, but how do we mobilize it to change that letter grade? How do we translate our C+ to a B to someday an A? And what we would argue at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston is that we have something called a civic infrastructure in all of these communities, and that is the mechanism through which we can mobilize civic engagement and translate a group of volunteers into a group of volunteers working hard to make poverty less of an issue for kids growing up in a city like Fall River, or to improve the school system in a place like New Bedford. What civic infrastructure is it's your network of leaders. Many of you are in the room right now as representing yourselves as committed and engaged residents of the South Coast, but you're also representing really important and powerful organizations in the region that have capacity to make the changes we need to improve our opportunity index and to make the South Coast a better place to be born. A lot of you are already doing that. You're looking at ways to work together across sectors, to collaborate in new ways, and to really identify strategies for changing systems to make our community better in the long term. So civic infrastructure is something that we're excited about at the Boston Fed because we've done some research to show that in cities that look a lot like New Bedford, cities that had manufacturing histories and were once really wealthy, really strong communities that have since experienced years of decline, can either resurge, they can stagnate, or they can get worse. And what we found is responsible for the resurgence is a strong civic infrastructure. What that looks like is leaders who come together from hospitals, from employers, from the municipal government, and they work together to collaborate in new ways to make their city look and feel like a place that's changing, and by doing that, they're making the change happen. So if we see this happening across the country, we think about how we can actually incentivize this in places where it's not happening. And from that derived our Working Cities Challenge. So what the Working Cities Challenge does, and what I have the privilege to work on every day now, is to think about how in Massachusetts we can turn Johns into Janes. So how do we improve the opportunity scores in these places? How do we change poverty? How do we change education? And how do we do that through civic infrastructure? So what we've done is we've worked together with the state government and with national philanthropy and the private sector to aggregate some resources that have been offered to Massachusetts cities in the form of a challenge. And what we're challenging communities to do is use your civic infrastructure to identify a problem that really connects to your low-income community and to kids being born in that place, and identify ways to change systems and make that issue better over a long term. And do that by bringing your leaders together and working in new ways, but also by engaging your community. So this is another area where civic engagement plays a huge role, because you can't change poverty without talking to people who are living in poverty. But at the same time, you can't really talk to people living in poverty effectively if they're not organized and if they're not civically engaged through institutions, through their church. So we really see these things as going hand in hand. We see civic infrastructure depending on civic engagement, but we also see civic infrastructure as being something that can promote civic engagement. And I think I could probably talk about this for the rest of the day, but my time is probably up. So I would just encourage all of you in the room, the leaders here in the community, and that includes the high school students too. I think we saw key roles for young people to be getting engaged on an individual level and making a difference, but also generating ideas for how we do this as a community. But I think the key here is to say, we know we're a C+, and ideally we'll know maybe next year, Russell, we'll know what New Bedford is, we'll know what Dartmouth is scoring, what it's like for a kid to grow up in these places. And we can say as a community and as leaders in the room, what is our strategy for working together and improving educational attainment or tackling the public health issues a lot of these cities face. So really excited to share more about the Working Cities Challenge and other venues and one way to make that work. But I think the fact that we're all here in the room and listening for these solutions is a great start. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Colleen. Our next discussant is Jacob Miller. You guys have heard a little bit about him today, but Jacob Miller is a junior majoring in political science and English, and he's a student representative to the UMass Board of Trustees. He is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Newman Civic Fellows, an award for civic engagement leaders like Jacob, the Michael Dukakis Public Service Award, and he's also an Endeavor Scholar, which is a scholarship based on academic achievement, leadership experience, and dedication to one's community and service. Give a nice round of applause to Jacob Miller.
So I first want to thank everybody for coming out today. It's definitely great and inspiring to be in a room with so many leaders in this region. And I want to thank Russell for coming from DC, and hopefully you're going to enjoy the South Coast. We're going to make you enjoy the South Coast. And then I also want to thank the Chancellor for all of her kind words. It's truly an honor to be selected as a Truman Scholar, and the Leduc Center for all that they do. So my question is really around mentorship. As a first generation college student and somebody who didn't have opportunity paved out for me, I definitely see the value of mentorship. State Senator Mark Montigny has been my mentor since my sophomore year of high school, where I cold called and asked for an internship with no real idea what an internship in the state office meant. I just called and said, "Hey, can I work for you?" So he took a chance on me, and ever since then my life has been great, and it's been a true work of progress. And what opportunity and what his opportunity really did for me. So really I want to ask a question to you, Russell, about mentorship and what the leaders in this room can do to mentor youth, because it is such a key to success, and what they can do to mentor youth outside of the traditional programs for youth mentorship.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you raised that. You know, I mentioned this big summit we just convened on youth employment, which included fantastic people like Jacob in our network, and a lot of young adults from different backgrounds. And so I just wanted to say, first of all, I love that there are lots of students here, there are high school students here. I think we shouldn't have conversations about solutions for youth without them being right in the mix and telling their own stories. So that's so huge. And part of their stories is that many of them lack caring adults in their lives, right? And so I would just say, 100%, I think that's hugely important, especially to target young people who are, not already surrounded by those networks, right? The young adults who are typically at risk for becoming disconnected with the data that we just looked at, and Wendy's going to have, I'm sure, a lot more data for you guys with all the great stuff CNCS collects. They are less likely to have a mentor in their life. We know there's a mentor gap right now in our country. Programs like AmeriCorps and other formal programs can help fill that. There's a lot of innovative nonprofits that help fill that. I think we also should have some personal agency around this, up to and including young people themselves. I mean, you can mentor a peer. I mean, that's part of, I think, having a caring person in your life. There's a benefit to that person sometimes being older, and there's also a benefit to that person being your age and like going through the same stuff that you are. So I think it's really important. At our summit, we really called on everybody to do something that they can make a difference on. We released a call to action, which called "We Got This" on youth employment. It's on our website as well. And we broke it down by sector. So we said, you're a business leader, here's what you can do. you are a young adult, here's what you can do. You're a nonprofit leader, you work at a higher ed institution. We've all got things we can do, from very low lifts up to big systemic changes. And so it includes a whole range of things, from, again, mentoring one person in your life, up to let's change HR practices, and let's not kick young adults out of the talent pool because maybe they haven't earned that 4-year degree yet, when maybe the job doesn't require it. Or if it does, let's make sure we have young adults that have earned those degrees and are the first in their family to have that opportunity, that get a look, that maybe don't have a lot of champions in their life. So I think there's a lot that we can do. One last resource that speaks to Jacob's good question I want to put on everyone's radar around this question of mentoring, around this question of engaging young adults that maybe have sort of non-traditional backgrounds. We have helped catalyze some work called Grads of Life, which is an effort to recognize young people with maybe non-traditional resumes who can be a real asset in the workplace. I would encourage you to check it out. It's two things. It's a repository of case studies that really help employers walk through, how do I build a good paid internship program or an apprenticeship program that really brings in young people effectively, that mentors them, that cultivates my next generation of leaders. There are probably employers in the room that already do that really well, and you're a model for the community. That's great. I know a lot of employers struggle. They either don't have staff to run those programs, or they aren't sure how to structure them. So there's a set of resources there to help folks. There's also some fantastic creative content. They're basically PSAs we worked with the Ad Council to create that are really, really compelling. So I'd encourage you to watch those and show them to friends, that demonstrate young people that have come from lots of traditional backgrounds and non-traditional ones, and maybe grew up in some of these counties that have a C grade on the Opportunity Index. We want to make sure that we're still giving them a chance as well. So those are a couple of resources I would point to equip folks, but would totally affirm the importance of mentorship.